So yeah, I wanted to make a point about prediction. Basically, we're saying that we basically make observations and then we make predictions based on those observations. I think David Deutsch also has another point of view. He says basically the first thing we do is we make conjectures about science, about things in the real world. We get them from our minds. It's not necessarily doesn't necessarily come from outside. We basically think about something, we make a conjecture, and then we make a hypothesis, an explanation, and then we test that explanation, and then we could make predictions, but predictions are not necessarily necessary. So sometimes, for example, in evolutionary theory, for instance, the predictions are not a big part of it, basically. Most of it is like basically explanations. It's not necessarily predictions. And he was saying that basically most predictions happen in the realm of physics rather than other realms in science. So he was saying that the main thing in sciences are basically conjecture making, which those conjectures go on to make explanations. And then those explanations basically make theories, and those theories make science. So he says that prediction is only a small part of it, and most likely it's going to be in the realm of theoretical physics or physics as a whole. So that's his point of view about science as a whole. He bases it more on explanations rather than on predictions, I would say. So that's also one point of view that's perhaps, I think, conflicting with your point of view a little bit, because he always
Okay.
criticizes people who reduce science to predictions, basically, which I think sometimes when I think about it deeply, I think what you're saying is kind of very similar to what he's saying, but just using a different language. But he always
Mm.
just criticizes people who say that science is all about predictions, and he says it's not a complete point of view. So,
Hmm.
and basically, the best
Okay.
book to read about those ideas is The Fabric of Reality by David Deutsch. It's very good, actually. I think it will be a very good resource
Yeah,
for you to explore.
I'll check it out.
Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's his whole point of view about science, I guess.
Well, yeah, I guess the way that I've been kind of trying to understand it is that uh, there's this vertical ascendancy, and that vertical ascendancy is more or less it's technology. And technology is the stuff, but if you can, it's like knowledge maybe is the better way to put it. It's the knowledge allows you to create the stuff. So, it's sort of like a dualistic thing. It's like there's technology and knowledge combined. What is that vertical ascendancy? I don't know what to call it, but
Mm-hmm.
I call it technology or something. It's like the technologic development of something, someone, or the civilization. Uh, so I think of that level. Um, and then there's this concept called the Kardashev scale. And the Kardashev scale is it says it asks the question like, well, um, what is a super advanced civilization? How could we measure advancement? And
Very interesting.
the Kardashev scale says, well, we can measure advancement um, by seeing the energy consumption
Mm.
rate
Wow.
of that civilization
Civilization.
or
Yep.
group or whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
and it goes by powers of 10 more or less, and so it starts at are you consuming less than the total amount of sunlight that is hitting the surface of the earth? And I think that's like something like 10 to the 18 watts. And then it goes to 10 to the 20, maybe it's 10 to the 16. I don't know, 10 to the 18 or 10 to the 16. And then it says 10 to the 28 is the total amount of energy that's coming out of the sun. So 10 to the 18 is just the amount of watts that are hitting the sun. Increase that by a power of 10, that's the entire amount of energy coming out of the sun. And that's what the Kardashev scale calls a type 1 civilization, is a civilization that can um, utilize all of the, or maybe that's a type 2, I don't know. I can't remember, but and then it goes
Mhm.
to galactic. Like the entire galaxy is something like 10 to the 38 watts. That's the entire galaxy. So if you can use that much energy, you're a type 3 civilization or a type 2
Ah, okay.
civilization.
Yeah.
Anyways, it's just one way to think about your technologic development. And if we go back in the past, we can see that our consumption level has gone up and up and up and up. There's a problem though, and it's how can you maintain that consumptive level at some point. um, you either run out of fuel,
Hmm.
like the candle wax burns out, or you know or you need to innovate some new technology to find some new energy resource. And
Hmm. Yep.
so maybe we could get into that. I don't know.
Yeah, it's
um,
interesting actually. Speaking about these things about efficiency and all these different things, I think there's one paradox that's called the Jevon's paradox, which is basically the
mhm.
idea. I'm sure you've heard of it because you're interested in
Yeah,
Daniel Schmachtenberger's ideas and stuff. So basically, what he's saying is that the more efficient we become, the more we consume things because that
yeah,
efficiency leads us to actually basically extract more things. And then that leads to a
mhm.
more rigorous or more vigorous cycle, basically, of consuming. So it doesn't
It's
necessarily reduce the consumption. It actually sometimes increases it because the market demands more of that efficient thing. So as soon as the market demands more, there becomes more consumption. So at the
Yeah,
end of the day, basically, the Jevons paradox says that efficiency does not necessarily mean that we are consuming less, if that makes sense. So it's a very
yeah.
interesting idea to
It,
link.
it it shows you that people have this intuitive sense that, oh well, when the in efficiencies increase, that means we will use less
Yeah,
energy.
yeah,
And
yeah.
he's just like, no, that's not true. It actually
Yes.
means that you just have more energy available to you. And if
Hmm.
you're in a capitalist society or something, it's going to try to use that energy, you know, it's going to try to use that energy to innovate, and that will give certain groups an advantage, and then and so on and so on. So yeah, it's interesting to think about energy as having two different dimensions, or at least two. There's probably a lot more, but one of them being, actually, I kind of wrote a thing about this. I think I found like something like um, eight different sort of dimensions of energy, but that I could think of. But one of them is just the power output. So like how much is burning? How bright, how hot is the energy consumption? And um, humanity consumes at a rate, I think it's something like 14 terawatts per moment. And it,
Wow.
yeah, so that's the rate at which things are being consumed. And there's the efficiency of the consumption. So uh, like a gas powered engine um, only is able to convert 20% of the energy released by the oil and the gas into mechanical energy. So there's all of this. It's only 20% efficient. So that's the efficiency at the point of consumption. And something like an electric motor, it's way more efficient. It's like 90, 99,
Hmm.
98%. Maybe it's less. Maybe it's like 90. But either way, it's a lot better than um, than a gas engine. So that's the efficiency at point of consumption. But then there's like the cycling. So like, is the energy being cycled like after it gets used? Is it just what are the waste products? Is it getting, like, if we look at nature, like a molecule might be consumed for the energy, but then it's recycled it's used by the creature, and then maybe it poops it out or something, and then other creatures are able to cycle that energy like multiple times. So nature is like amazingly efficient with its how it recycles energy. So
Hmm.
energy can be recycled, but at each transformation, there's going to be a loss
Yep.
of the energy to heat. So it's not like you can recycle things forever. It's a skill. You have to get good at it, you know. When we recycle plastic or bottles, there's energy required to recycle plastic and turn it into more plastic. So there's a loss. It's not like, oh, wait, we just do this. It's infinite, and
Yep.
it's not infinite. There's a loss. There's always a loss. But the question is, how well can you cycle the energy?
And minimize the
Uh,
loss basically of that.
yeah.
Yep.
Or do the waste products turn into things that can be used by other things, um, like in nature, if an animal dies, the body turns into food
Yeah,
for
yeah.
like a billion other things. And
Exactly. Yeah.
in civilization, if a car explodes, it's that doesn't happen. It just burns. It goes into the trash heap,
Yep.
and then it's inefficient in how it is transferring that energy and
Mm.
recycling that energy. It's a very inefficient like structure that we're not we can't do it as well as nature,
Yeah. It's an
but
interesting,
perhaps we could, but
yeah, yeah, very interesting comparison because I think the way you put it is that nature actually is good in extracting energy. And also, after it finishes from extracting that energy, basically the energy lost can be reused or recycled, as opposed to technological innovations where it could actually extract energy efficiently, but it cannot dispose of energy efficiently. So nature does the two steps very well, as opposed to the
very well.
technological advancements where it's only ticking one box, basically. And we have to start to
Yeah.
think about the second box, basically.
Another thing, another dimension is the sustainability of a system. So
Mm.
if we look at nature, it's all of the energy is really coming from the sun for nature. For us, it's coming from a lot of it, or almost all of it, is coming from fossil fuels, which is ancient sunlight. But
Mm.
um, or if it comes from uranium, that's from the energy of old supernovas, which is pretty insane.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but so because it's coming from the present sunlight for nature, uh, nature can, or I'm calling it nature. I should probably call it the ecosystem of Earth. Because
Yep.
nature doesn't. I mean, we all think of nature as being like. I think it's too broad of a term to sort of describe the ecosystem of Earth, but that's what I'm referring to when I say nature.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, I mean, it's been here for billions of years because it's using this energy source that is constantly providing, and it's very stable. It's a stable source of energy, whereas humans, um, we we started just utilizing the energy from the sun by only using, by consuming food in the forest. But eventually we figured out that, okay, we can burn trees. And if we burn trees, we can cook our food, and then we can also keep, predators at bay. Uh, and we can make certain materials that we couldn't make before. Eventually, burning trees kind of in the industrial age gave way to burning coal, which is like, it's just like condensed trees. It's like trees that is like a brick of trees. and there's tons of it. It's really easy to extract. When you have to use trees, you have to cut forests down, and they don't grow back for right away. It takes generations for them to grow back.
Hmm.
And if you look at some of the ancient empires, like they fell because they ran out of trees. Like you can look back to like ancient Rome, and they were extracting trees from, I think they were extracting trees from parts of France, and so they had cut down a lot of the trees around them, and they had run out of them. And there was a theory that went around that saying that the reason why the empire collapsed was because they ran out of trees.
There are
Um,
infinite reasons for why the Roman, like a lot of people actually, some people say that it's about the, I guess, the inflation of the monetary
yeah,
system. So every specialized person will actually link it to
interesting.
their yeah,
That's pretty funny.
yeah, yeah,
Well, I like to link it to trees.
yeah.
Uh, so yeah, I forgot where I was going there, but
Yeah, you were saying about the Roman Empire, basically, of them cutting trees and taking it from France.
yeah, but I forgot what I was talking about before.
But I think
uh,
the idea of, I guess, especially nowadays, the idea of nuclear is becoming just going a bit, I guess, astray from this specific topic, is the idea of nuclear, basically. And I think you tweeted once about it, the nuclear approach of certain countries. But what do you
yeah,
think about the implementation of nuclear power plants, basically, to provide
yeah.
for people's use of
It's
energy?
it's obviously a
And
something
not to
that,
cut you off, but I think one time you mentioned thorium as well, which I've read
yeah,
previously about, like very briefly. I think it was implemented in California for 20 years. It was actually very efficient, but
I
I'm
don't
not sure
believe so.
why.
I think any thorium reactors that have actually worked um, are brand new, and
Oh, wow.
they there's not even really clear information if they exist or not. Like, are they in China, or like people actually think about it? It seems like that this is sort of like a secret topic. Like people are thinking about
Ah,
this,
okay.
but they're not talking about it. But thorium seems to be a possible innovation. Thorium, like nuclear, is just the idea that energy, um, well, like where oil and fossil fuels is the idea that energy is stored in molecules, and we can find those molecules, in the ground by digging them up and burning them. Um, where nuclear is energy is stored in atoms, so we can find all these different kinds of atoms because you know in order for an atom to kind of get created from like like the most simplest atom there is like a hydrogen atom. You can create every single atom you want with hydrogen atoms. You just have to squish them together enough,
Mm,
but it takes an incredible amount of energy to squish them,
yep, yep.
and that's the energy of gravity, and the only thing that's strong enough to do that is gravity. And so gravity has done that, you know, to atoms. So any atom that is existing that's not like that's not a light atom, it's a heavy atom that came from processes, like stars collapsing, and just old ancient things that from the stars.
Hmm.
So these atoms are kind of like sprinkled in our earth, and we can find them. And then also like the amount of energy that it releases, like a single atom, uh, heavy atom, it's so much more than chemical energy. So again, this similar kind of process unfolds where before we extracted all of the, the, the molecules and chemicals out of the ground, that if we just transition into, okay, well, now it's atoms, so now we extract all the atoms out of the ground and we have more energy. It still doesn't solve the problems where energy really has to be looked at as a multidimensional thing. It's not just power consumption. It's also
Mm.
efficiency and it's also recycling.
Yep, yep. The points you
It's
mentioned
also
about the nature and versus technology.
it's also the sustainability of the system. And now I'm remembering what I was talking about before, but you can see how stable nature is compared to humanity, which like as humanity starts using these higher sources, higher forms of energy, like trees and coal and oil, we get all of these advantages. But at the same time, we're becoming more and more unstable because those sources of energy, it's like you don't just come across a banquet, you know, in the middle of the desert like every day. You might come across it once in your life,
Yep.
but it's not going to be there. Like it's not going to be. It's not like just infinite amount of oil in the ground. There's not an infinite amount of coal in the ground. There's a lot, but it's also hard to get. Like you gotta dig it out. You like before in the past, like when we were just starting with oil, it was right at the surface. You could dig it out by just a hammer. You just hit the ground and you get some buckets and you scoop it out. And
Wow.
now you have to dig down
Yeah.
thousand feet.
Which
You know.
says a lot about the approach humanity had, basically. Yeah. I also
So
think this links to the idea of energy being multidimensional. So basically, what you're saying is that we as humanity have looked at energy from a one-dimensional perspective, which is just to consume, and then we forget everything after that, basically. We don't think about how we can recycle the energy because it's not a short-term consequence. It basically comes on the long term. That's why, and we as humans in
yeah,
general, we tend to think about the short term more so than the long term. It's just how we are, I guess, programmed. I would say programmed is not a precise word, but it's just how we think about things. So
yeah.
this also links to the short term versus long term, I would say. So it's a very interesting link, I would say.
But because we're becoming more unstable because our energy consumption is getting higher, we have to think of the long term like the short term. We have to think like, okay, well, what are we going to eat tomorrow? What are we going to eat the day after tomorrow? Oh, where are we going to get our energy in 10 years? Where are we going to get well, how is this going to work? How do we build an energy system so that it continues to work? How can we make it resilient? Like, okay, you know, we could set up this whole like resiliency is another thing. So how sustainable is a system, but also how resilient is a system. So like, plants, I mean, nature is incredibly resilient. It can evolve, some mechanism stops working, all these other things come up and just change it. It, so nature is taking all of this energy from the sunlight.
Mm-hmm.
There's millions of different plants that do that. It's not just one species of plants, but it's also algae. It's like it's millions of species of algae. Where if humans were to do it, we'd probably create some sort of like solar panel made by it's a one solar panel, and then one solar panel goes wrong, everything stops working. So
Yeah.
resiliency is another dimension
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
you know different. So yeah. Anyways, yeah, thinking about energy in broader terms, like it's not just about the consumption. It's not just about the efficiency of at use. It's not just about recycling. It's all of these things because recycling doesn't do anything if you don't have any power to begin with.
Yeah. I also think like we kind of have hindsight bias nowadays because we already consumed a lot of energy in the previous, I guess, years, in the recent years, especially from the beginning of the scientific revolution, all these different things and
More energy consumed per person than any time ever before
yeah,
it. Like
exactly. And I think
we've
you,
lived in a time of plenty and we don't realize it, but it's true.
yeah, I agree 100%. And I think the reason why we're saying that sustainability is important and resilience is important cannot be said at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Like no one could really predict that that is the best way possible unless you make the mistake, if that makes sense. So I think nowadays we can say that resilience is important, sustainability is important. But I think if we were at the beginning of the scientific revolution, it wouldn't be that obvious. We would just think that we can just consume and that's it. But I think nowadays, as we're running out of some forms of energy, we're realizing that resilience is important, sustainability is important. So I
Yeah,
think a lot of people give the people who made those things a hard time, but I don't think it's rational because we kind of have the, as I said, the hindsight advantage. We can look back
right.
and say, okay, they made those mistakes. So I think you have to, especially in
It was
this
a natural
specific
development
discussion,
for them.
yeah, exactly. I think you
Yeah.
have to make the mistake to realize that sustainability is important, resilience is important. So I kind of see it as a good thing to some degree that we consumed this much energy and we didn't do a good job. So we can
Yeah.
learn that this is basically not the right way to do it or to consume energy. We have to look at it as you mentioned, through a multi-dimensional lens from many different
I
angles.
I think I am a little like concerned, I guess. I
Hmm.
because you can only burn the oil once, and once you extract it and once you burn it, you can't do it again. So civilization only really has one chance to get this right with the energy that's available, you know. After the oil's gone, where are you going to get the energy, you know? If you don't have oil, where are you going to get the energy? You don't get it from anywhere else. I mean, if you do get energy, it's going to be much, much, much less, you know.
Hmm.
It's not going to be more. And so you need to use oil to build nuclear. Like if you don't use oil to build nuclear, you're wasting the oil, you know?
Oh,
Like
interesting. So you basically, in order to build nuclear plants, you need oil consistently or just one time to just build the plant? Is it
it's not just
how?
the plants. Yeah, it's kind of building the new system. The whole system has to be built in order to work with this new energy, the nuclear energy.
Ah, interesting.
Uh,
Okay, okay, okay. Yeah.
but that takes an incredible amount of energy to just build the system. Once the
Okay.
system is up and it's stable, and then there are like machines that use I don't know, that can use electricity to um, mine, more nuclear atoms, like uranium or thorium or whatever. Then okay, that new system is stable, but like the old system has to get us there. We can't just like be like, oh, yeah, all right, we ran out of oil. Well, I guess we'll just switch to nuclear. Like, no, it doesn't work like that. What are you going to do? You're going to build a nuclear civilization with wood? You can't. You have no machines anymore. You ran out of oil. You can't build how can you extract the atoms out of the ground? You're not left with energy to build the new system. You have to use the energy to build the newer systems. And so we've used an incredible amount until now. Like, I think what we have done though, uh, is we've built this network. We've built artificial intelligence. We've built these new systems, and perhaps, like, my thought is that maybe if this artificial intelligence gets going, it could maybe animate with some machines with, we could start to channel our energy into that, and it could start to build things, and it could start to pave the way for the new energy system. But it's a long shot. We should have been slower about how we're burning the oil, because we should have been thinking about this, like, we should have been thinking about this in the 80s, like, okay, there's no longer like world wars right now. Like, let's figure out how to transition into these into a system that's more sustainable, because this oil stuff, it's great, it's amazing, but the candle burns out eventually, and we can get the candle brighter for a little while. But and we've managed to do that for the past 40 years, uh, consistently every year. More oil, more coal, more trees. But we're starting to see that point. We're starting to see that point right now where it's like that seems like the oil is slowing down, and there are different signs to show that that's happening. But I mean, just one really like kind of simple way of sort of understanding that phenomenon is this concept of energy return upon energy invested. So like if you're hunting a fish, or if you're hunting like a something in the forest, if it's if it's stronger than you, if that thing in the forest is stronger than you and it's more tough than you, and then you finally get the animal, but there's no meat on it, it's all bones. The energy that you invested into trying to hunt that animal didn't return in more energy, or you could use the metaphor for farming. You could say, I've been working all year long. I've been trying to grow these plants, and they grew, and they taste horrible. You can't eat them. The energy that you invested did not turn into a return of energy. Where you could flip that around. You could say, okay, well, I was in the forest and I found this massive animal, and it was made out of hamburgers, and it was so easy. All I had to do was just there's or there's a tree that just there's so much fruit on it. You can just go to that tree. All you have to do is go there. You can fill your whole bag up, and there's infinite. That's a very good energy return upon energy invested.
Mm.
Well, with
Yeah.
oil, you can see that the EROEI, um, in like the 20s was 100 to 1. So like for every barrel of oil that you invested, you would get out 100,
Okay.
and even 1,000 to 1 before that. So it was like incredibly productive. And over time, it's gone down. And I found a graph of this, but I can't share my screen right now. But um, it goes down, and it's it's gone down to now, which is like it's around, it's between like 15, 10, 20.
So
Certain like
from 100 to 10, basically, or to 1,
yeah,
10 to 1 ratio
yeah,
per barrel.
and then you look at the different types of extraction processes. Like there's the conventional oil wells, which is like that's what we, those are incredibly productive. They've been pumping out oil for decades, and thousands, hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil, are coming out of these conventional wells consistently. There's a consistent flow, but eventually they run out. But we can see that the return, the energy return is good on those kinds of things. But they dry up, and so you can see that the conventional wells, the conventional wells dried up in the United States in the 70s. And then conventional wells started being drilled all over the world kind of after that. So the United States oil production like was up in the 70s, and then it went down. And then 2008 comes around, and then oil companies figure out, oh, we can do something called fracking, and fracking is like a new style of oil extraction where they dig down, instead of digging down 1,000 feet, they dig down 10,000 feet. So they
Wow.
go way, way, way down, and there's like this layer of rock on the bottom,
Okay.
and they pull out this little strip of rock, and they find this very precise layer, and then they drill sideways another 10,000 feet,
Wow.
and then they take in high pressure water, and they put water in there, and they crack they crack all the rock around it, then they pull it back, they crack all the rock, they pull it back, they crack all the rock,
Ah, okay.
crack all the rock, and then they pull all that oil out. And so that's what fracking is.
Mm.
And
That I guess caused a lot of profit for those companies, for
it
sure.
did. I mean, all of a sudden, the production of United oil production in the United States, it went up in the 70s, it went down. Fracking comes along, now it's back up again. So we have oil production here. But if you look at how long the wells last, so like a conventional well might last 30, 40 years, but these wells, they only last like, I mean, you crack all this rock, you pull all the oil out, and it's done. So you have to move on, So they don't last, and the amount of energy that you have to use to crack all these rocks, like it's super high pressure, PSI, 800 PSI, like um, water being pressed in there from miles away. So the EROEI, the energy return upon energy invested of fracking, is much lower than conventional wells. So although we can extract the oil in the end, like the amount that we get out of it, it's like a tree in the forest that has fruit, but you have to climb to the very top, and it's not that good,
Mm.
or it's good, but it's that kind of, or maybe you have a farm where you work all year long and you get just barely enough food to do it again next year, but
Yeah.
you don't have a surplus, So we're kind of in that situation where the conventional wells are drying up, and then we're having to rely more and more on this fracking, but we're also running out of places to do it. So in at least in the Permian, it seems that in the United States that and there is a lot more fracking available in the United States, but um, I think this is a very controversial topic too. Whenever people talk about peak oil, there's thousands of people that say, "Well, you're crazy! Like that's not happening. There's so much oil in the ground." And they're right. There is a lot of oil in the ground, but that doesn't mean that all of the oil is easily accessible. It doesn't mean that all the oil that's left is the same uh, is as easy to pull out as it was the newer stuff,
Okay, yeah.
or
So
the older
basically,
stuff.
so the investment to return ratio kind of
It
decreases with
changes.
time. Yeah, which
Yes.
makes it less not efficient, but basically the energy you're investing is not worth it for some
At
reason.
some point, I mean, if it gets to 1 to 1,
Then yeah,
then then it doesn't do anything. But even when it starts dipping below 10 to 1, some things start to occur. It's not, we want to be in that 100 to 1 place,
yeah.
but we've definitely gone below that. And we're not going to get above that with oil ever again. So if we want to get into that 100 to 1, 1,000 to 1 range, we have to think about new technologies. And it's clear that the EROEI is not going up; it's going down. So it's like that's like a fuse. We have a certain amount of time to build some new system that can hopefully, project us up into, the 1,000 to 1 EROEI. Because if we don't get there with oil, we're not going to get there with trees. We're not going to get there with coal. We're not going to get there with windmills. We're not going to get there with solar. I mean, all that stuff, solar, windmills, the EROEI is like 4 to 1.
Mm,
So it also takes a lot of materials and mining.
yeah.
It's very sophisticated, requires high temperatures.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
nowadays we're at a point where we have dispersed building blocks, I would say. So we can we have the building blocks for the innovation, but it's just not there yet, I would say. And I think the closest to that return to invest ratio is probably the nuclear nowadays, because as you
yeah,
said, the solar and all these different things only have a 4 to 1 ratio, which is very low. there isn't enough incentives. And I think the link with economics and energy in this specific, in the things you're saying, is probably that if we didn't have a monetary system that could be inflated to oblivion, then those things wouldn't be able to happen, basically. So we wouldn't be able to extract that much oil at this fast pace, and that would
Yeah,
all these different cascade issues. So I think the link between energy and economics or the monetary system is pretty interesting as well. In this
you
specific.
actually you actually hit the nail on the head because that's exactly exactly the right way to think about it is that that's the reason why. I mean, it's not that there's actually game theory, like it makes sense. Like the dollar was detached from gold in the 1970s. Why? Why? Well, it's obvious if you think about it. The reason was because we ran out of oil in the United States. That's the reason. And
Mm,
so they said, okay, well, we can't produce, our wealth, so we have to, or we can't extract our wealth, so we have to go create wealth by extracting oil from other places and being able to use it with our, sophisticated economy. And
mm.
uh, I don't know if I'm explaining this right, but
Yeah, I think what you're saying is basically that they moved the monetary system from being linked to oil or sorry, to gold, and then they moved it to being in the form of debts from other people and taxation, basically. So
debt
instead of
allowed
just
them to go. Debt does two things. Um, if you think about like the difference between China and the United States, like China can say, we want to build a bridge right there, and we're going to do it now, and so they build the bridge, immediately. Amazing. Um, in the United States, if they want to build a bridge, they say, we want to build a bridge here. Okay, let's vote. Do you want to build the bridge? No. Okay, yes, no. Okay, yeah. All right, we're building the bridge. And then they say, all right, well, now we need to get taxes, so they get the money, and now we need to figure out, which part of the taxes we're going to use it. We're going to use it at this part. Um, so that's all slow, and eventually, like the bridge in the United States gets built in like 10 years, or 20 years, and in China it gets built immediately.
yeah.
But debt allows you to be like, okay, we'll expand the currency, and they expand it by selling treasury bonds. So if you don't know about this mechanism, it's kind of interesting to just understand. But so the United States has two different ways to get money to do stuff. It either taxes the population directly, or it can sell what are called treasury bonds. And treasury bond is like, it's basically like an IOU. It says, um, you give us money, you give us $10, and in the future we'll give you $15. So it's like it's a it's a you can buy these things from the government, and it allows the government to get money now, without having to go through taxes.
Mm. Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
it has to pay back in the future, and it pays back, at a percentage increase. But it's just been doing that by inflating the currency.
Yeah,
So
they create more. They basically they don't pay it back. They just create more debt, more debt, more debt, more debt, more debt, and then
yeah,
that
and
leads to
eventually
yeah,
that hyperinflates. But
yeah.
it doesn't, though, if you're able to expand the economy and expand the energy consumption, expand the energy production. Because if it's growing, like let's say you're growing at 2% per year, and your treasury bonds are at 2% per year, well, then it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's even at that point. But if it's contracting, then you get hyperinflation,
Mm-hmm.
like immediately.
Yeah.
So we're kind of at that point. Um, now. But yeah, the we were able to use debt to be like, because it was a race. It was a race to get the oil, because whoever you had first, you had to industrialize. Like, it's not enough to just have oil. You have to be industrially sophisticated to be able to turn money and turn oil into a civilization, into an economy. Like, it takes infrastructure to be able to utilize the energy. So the United States already had the infrastructure, and they realized that, well, we're out of oil now. So what do we do? If we don't, our advantage is we already have you know, an industrialized economy. So we can make use of this oil really well. We can turn it into products and iPhones and
Mm-hmm.
computers, but other countries can't. And if they have to go and industrialize, then they can use their oil. Maybe it's more efficient if we just use all the oil and we just build everything for everyone else. That was like, I feel like that was a kind of like the idea, and if they don't do that, what happens is the United States would have become less powerful and other countries would
Mm.
become more powerful because they would have had the oil. So they kind of like, it seems like they kind of tricked people into, okay, well, we're going to use your oil. We'll give you all this money, you know, uh, and we can use it in this economy. You can buy all these products, but a lot of the times those countries never actually developed themselves. Um, so it was a race. It was a race to get the oil, and it was a race to use it. But it wasn't it wasn't a race that was conscious. It wasn't a race that was conscientious, or it wasn't intentional enough, because
Mm.
it needed to build a new system. And I think the system that it has been building is a network. It's been building a network, it's been building artificial intelligence. But where's the infrastructure? There's no, I mean, it's had 50 years to build nuclear power plants. It's had 50 years to innovate upon nuclear, but none of this has really happened, you know?
Yeah, the
Instead,
system. Yeah, go ahead.
the system's just been growing, and it's just been building networks, but it hasn't been innovating on the infrastructure itself.
Yeah, I think because economically there aren't many incentives that incentivize people to actually build on infrastructure. And I think Scott Alexander calls this Moloch, basically. I'm sure you read about this at one point, basically, which is the idea that the incentive structures kind of makes people eat on the infrastructure. So they're operating or they're optimizing for something. So, for example, they're optimizing for profits, but that would be at the cost of eating away some of the infrastructure or just neglecting it altogether. So I think this also is a link towards the idea of capitalism being incentivizing people to have profits, but not incentivizing people to build resilient and very sustainable systems, I guess. So it all goes back to thinking about the economics and linking it with the idea of energy, I think. As soon as we understand the holistic point of view and we see how the incentive structures are made, then we can understand why those behaviors emerge, basically, to neglect infrastructure and all these different things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it also links to the idea of the short term versus the long term as well. So we mentioned it previously or earlier that operating or optimizing for things on the short term will always lead to less sustainable or resilient infrastructure. So we have a system that's built on short term consequences, basically. So people just take debts, for instance, as you said, governments would take debts or sell some treasury bonds at the expense of the long term consequences. So I think we have to think about these things as a civilization.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I think one
Yeah.
thing that also links to this, I'm not sure if you have any thoughts or additional thoughts to energy, but I think we could also go into the topic of ethics, which you
Okay.
mentioned or asked
Yeah.
recently. So what do you think? You said that what is ethics and what is goodness, basically. So that was your question. So you can start
Mhm.
by actually answering this. How do you think about ethics as an idea?
Um, yeah, I just started streaming to Twitch, so we're
No,
streaming
sure.
on Twitch now.
Yeah.
uh, Ethics. Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I guess
I think we can start at the place of saying whether it's first person, second person, or third person. So what do you think? Do you think ethics is first person, second person, third person? I have an intuition about this, but I'm very interested to hear your answer first.
I think it's second person. It has to do with relationship, uh, and um, I don't know. I try to think of ethics from like yeah. Ethics are about how human beings are interacting with each other, um, and it's like for what? So why why interact with each other at all? You know, and for what is it? What is the purpose? You know, what is the purpose of what is the perfect purpose of the interactions at all? And there's some added benefit that comes from working with others, and I think that added benefit is at some level it has to do with survival. You know, like we have a better time and it's life is easier when we work together, essentially. And so I don't know, and that's I don't have a clear like answer really,
Mm,
but I just been thinking about it, and my intuition is that it has something to do with has ethics has something to do with survival. So
mm,
you know, if we think about like a cell or um, different kinds of organisms, that very simple organisms that have like a membrane, you know, like that there are some organisms that the membrane is the organization in the organism is very um, there is very little organization, and then the single cells become more and more complex. The membrane becomes more and more defined,
mm,
and the way that the everything works together becomes more and more sophisticated.
yeah.
Uh, in the same way, I guess you could think that perhaps is something like ethics, where um, the civilization learns to cohere and work together in more and more defined and nuanced way, I guess,
Yeah.
for more better survival, better quality of life, better yeah, I don't know. I guess that's kind of what I'm thinking. What
Yeah,
do
I
you think?
think I think the conceptualization you mentioned is very much related to Ayn Rand's conceptualization. She's a Russian writer. I'm not sure if you ever heard of her. So
Yeah, I have.
she has this idea called objectivism, where she says that ethics should be derived from survival and reproduction, basically. So anything that leads the individual to survive more is ethical, and anything that
Yeah.
doesn't lead the person to survive is unethical. But
Hmm.
I do kind of decouple from this conceptualization because I think there's more to ethics. Like I think there are a lot of things in society that are ethical but do not necessarily lead to more survival. And there are things that are unethical but does not necessarily affect survival. So I think it's not a complete model. I would say it's a necessary condition, but it's not sufficient. So that's my conceptualization of her model. with regards to why we interact as humans, I think one answer is because it makes more things possible. So that's the simplest answer I could say on why humans actually interact. So I think it just basically makes more things possible. So why not? So I
Yeah.
think, yeah, this is one answer to the question. In regards to what is ethics, I think one good way to put it is to say that it's how humans should interact. So it's deriving an oath from an is. It's not an is statement, it's an oath statement. So that's how I think about what is ethics, or how I define it, I would say. Now, the should is where people actually divide. So a lot of people, it's kind of subjective. So people differ on where the should come from, if that makes sense. So ethics is how we should interact, but people differ on where the should specifically come from. And one conceptualization is Ayn Rand's, and there are different, I guess, other like ideas when it comes to ethics. So some people would base it on religion, some people would base it on subjective experiences or happiness, some people. So I think that's my main, I would say, thought process when it comes to ethics. And there's also a very interesting essay by Ayn Rand as well, where she speaks about these things in detail. She says that anything, she doesn't necessarily base it on the survivability of the individual, but she bases it on the survivability of society as a whole. So, for example, a doctor would be, in Ayn Rand's conceptualization, an ethical person because he's leading to more survivability for other people and not only himself.
Yeah. I guess you can start to think about how this breaks down, because you can think about a society that is insane, that just wants to survive, and at the expense of all the individuals, you know.
Exactly.
And similarly, you can think of an individual that wants to survive at the expense of a collective, and um, and that's kind of like a psychopath, you know, or a, you know, some sort of monster, you know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So at some level, it's about survival, and I'm just thinking about this in real time. So I haven't actually. This is just coming together just
Yeah.
from what you were saying. Now I'm starting to think about it a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
clearly. At some so and second person, meaning it's about relationship. Uh, at some level, it is about the objective to survive. Um, and at the other level, it's about the experience of well-being, you know. So well-being for a psychopath, though, isn't very good for survival for everybody else.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, but I don't know. I mean, there's tigers exist in nature. I mean, how do you make sense of that? I mean, they are just brutal. I mean, the way that they will. I mean, have you ever observed a cat? The way that they kill birds,
Yeah. Yeah.
insane.
They actually
Uh,
just start to, I guess, eat away their organs and stuff like that. So,
there's no mercy at
yeah.
all, and uh, that exists in nature. How do you make sense of that? I mean,
I think her conceptualization is more, not to cut you off, but I think her idea is more relating to humans, I guess. So she says that animals are innately unethical, basically, because they risk the survival of others just for them to survive, if that makes sense. So
I have
humans,
to
yeah, go ahead.
I have to think about the concept of ethics as being broader than
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah.
humans.
Yes,
I have to
exactly.
think about these things as if they are innate to the cosmos, you know,
Mm.
like so I mean, what, I don't know. I can understand that, like, understanding through the lens of humans definitely is easier in a lot of ways to make sense of things, because how do you make sense of nature? And but I think we do have to take that more cosmic perspective to try to understand, like, the, I don't know, are there some fundamental things going on that exist for all species, you
Mm.
know, that we can tap into.
Yeah.
Uh,
I also think thinking about the conception of animals, I would say, makes us think about what ethics are not, if that makes sense. So we can exclude some things and say that, oh, okay, this is not ethical, this is not ethical. And we can apply it to our, I guess, human approach. So yeah, I think it's useful to think about the animal kingdom when thinking about ethics as well, because we can see what things are unethical that we kind of had as blind spots or, and all these different things.
One thing that one thing that I've been uh, thinking about recently was is that how everything is connected to everything else. So when we're talking about ethics, at some level, it's connected to it winds itself into all these other topics,
Mm,
like even physics, or like or I, or science or mathematics, like, but so it's hard to sort of at some level I like to sort of separate everything out and say that this is second person, this is first person, this is third person, but at another level they all
yeah,
kind of blend together.
but I think in order to understand them, you have to kind of separate them. And I think also humans, like society is built on abstractions. So I think
Yeah,
in order to actually think about why the things that are happening are like why are they happening in society, so for instance why inflation is happening, you have to separate to take other people's perspective, because I think people by nature just separate things, even though at a deeper level, as you said, all things are connected at the end of the day, but our behavior emerges from the idea of separation. So in order
yeah,
to understand other humans behaviors, I guess you would have to separate and take like their perspective for one instance. But yeah, understanding that at a deeper level, everything is connected is very deep, I would say. And I think I was reading the essay you shared with me, which is Ken Wilber's ideas. And he
oh
mentioned the
yeah,
idea
yeah,
of a holon, I think, which is a whole
yeah,
basically
hold
that's, yeah. So there's the idea is basically that there is no whole. Every whole is a part of another whole, and it
yeah.
goes ad
Well,
infinitum.
no, yeah, I guess he says that there are no like pristine wholes and there are no pristine parts, that everything is a whole part. So it's
Yeah,
like,
hold on.
if you look at the body, you know, it's made up of all these little parts of other things, and then those things are made up of all these other little parts, and then
Yeah,
yeah, it's bizarre.
yeah,
But
everything
yeah,
is hold on. It's a very deep idea, but I also think at some level it breaks down, as I said, like I think this is a good point to emphasize, which is the idea that thinking about things as having no boundaries is useful in some contexts. Like I used to when I actually got exposed to Daniel Schmachtenberger's idea, I kind of had this enthusiasm where I would think about everything as one thing. But then I realized that this conceptualization is not accurate when thinking about human behavior because people separate, as I said. So, in order to understand people's psychology and people's psychology affects the world, you have to separate those things to some degree at some level. So, in one point, it's useful to think about, but at another instance, is not very useful to actually
yeah.
think about things as one thing, one blob.
But maybe it's good to have both perspectives open.
Yep,
So it's like we can
exactly.
we can talk from this perspective, from that
Yes,
perspective,
I agree
and
100%. Yeah.
yeah, maybe that just, I don't know, more allows, there's a story of all these blind men uh, trying to perceive an elephant, and so they have to touch it because they can't see. So that one person's touching the face and
Yeah,
says,
yeah,
"Oh,
yeah.
this is," or touching the tusk. Say, this animal is made out of bone. The other one
Yeah.
touches the tail and says, "This animal is made out of rope." You know, the other one touches the hair. This animal is made out of hair. But all of them are seeing the same thing, but they're just seeing it from different
Yep,
perspectives.
yep.
Um, but yeah, coming back to ethics and trying to find uh, trying to find some sort of, is there a cosmic perspective of ethics? And like, um, if we try to look at the universe, like, if we try to look at the universe itself, it seems to be, I mean, from one level, it's just the Big Bang, and it's just burning out like a candle, and eventually all the energy will be spread out, and it'll just just be uh, like everything, all of the atoms, all of the uranium, it breaks down into hydrogen, and then all those subatomic particles break down, and everything just turns into entropy, and it spreads out, and like a still pond, it just becomes still,
Mm.
and um, absolute zero, like everything goes to silence and quiet and stillness, and it spreads out. That's like entropy, that's what's happening to the universe. But then on the other level, there's these creatures. What are we doing? We're like, in a sense, we're trying to reverse entropy. We're trying to do the opposite of what's happening to the universe. We're trying to survive. We're
Mm.
trying to maintain something, and it's kind of interesting to think that, well, is the whole universe doing that to some level? Is the whole universe trying to become more intelligent and then merge and wake up? Like, is the universe becoming like a being, or like, that's this thought, that uh, what's his name, Azarian, uh, I forget his first name, but that's what he was saying. It's called the Omega Principle,
Ah,
and
yeah, yeah, I read about it last time actually. Yeah.
yeah,
So
the
basically that
universe is,
the universe is trying to become more and more conscious with time.
yeah,
But
it's essentially, it's like, through us, like, we're like the consciousness of the universe, like and then as we technologically develop into, you know higher, more knowledge and more technology, we can merge all these different things together. I mean, like, the fact that we're having a conversation is bizarre.
yeah,
You're on the other side of the world. You're at an airport.
yeah, yeah.
But you can think, like, even further, like, what happens when we can interface with people with just, like, our minds can sort of blend in. Do we become a collective mind at that point? Like,
I think to a
um,
degree we are a collective mind, like as humanity, which is very interesting, I think. Like we're kind of even with our approach towards science and all these, like every single institution we have on the face of the planet is a collective one, which says a lot about our psychology. So I think we've already reached that point in a sense that we're a collective species. We're not very much individualistic, I would say.
sure, but you can see that this could even go beyond,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
into, I know what happens if it connects in with the animals, and then with all these other things, and then other planets and other galaxies. Like, as everything wakes up and then becomes connected, and, like, does the entire universe wake up? At that point, does it become like a being, a conscious being? And is that something to do with ethics? Like, is ethics, it's not just about survival of the individual, although it is. Um, it also has to do with this collective, like, movement of collective, I don't know, becoming,
Mm,
collective, the entire, this cosmic sort of, this cosmic, I don't know how to call it, but awakening or something.
mm.
This cosmic consciousness becoming, a growing. Is that part of ethics? Part of me thinks it is, but
Yeah,
I don't
I think
know.
we can kind of implement the idea of the separation versus thinking of things as one whole. I think when it comes to ethics, the best type of, approach to think about it with is separating things, because I think if you think about things as one thing, you cannot really act in this world, because any action kind of leads to consequences on another entity, if that makes sense. So you have to separate it and say, okay, so the limit is humans basically, but we could, for example, eat animals, for instance, when it comes to ethics. So let's assume that we think of ethics as, or we think of everything as one thing basically, and we don't want to harm anything else, then we cannot eat, because you can't eat animals, for instance. So I think when it comes to ethics, you have to separate it and say that, okay, it stops there. It stops at humans, for instance, or it stops at animals, or it stops at plants, whatever you want to stop. So I think you
The
have to
relative,
set the line
the
very
relative
clearly.
and the absolute. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So I think when it comes
Well,
to ethics, you would have to make the limit very clear, in the sense that you have to accept that you're going to, I wouldn't say necessarily harm, but you're going to cause some consequences to some X entity, whether it's animals, for instance, to survive, or whether it's plants. You have to make it very clear in order for you to define your ethics, if that makes sense. But thinking of all things as one thing, and then saying, I don't want to actually make consequences on the whole thing, then it becomes a crippling type of ethics, if that makes
well,
sense.
I think you can hold both perspectives open at the same time without, and I think we can demonstrate that by looking at how an individual has personal ethics
Mm-hmm.
when at the same time I'm in a family and my family has a family dynamic and ethics within the family. And uh, that doesn't mean I can't have like the ability to work within the framework of my family's like dynamics or my family's. I don't know. I feel like there doesn't have to be an edge, but there are differences. You know, there are these different perspectives. There's a
Mm-hmm.
but and there are boundaries, but I don't know. I guess my what I'm trying to say is that not everything has to be concrete.
Yeah,
It can be like flexible, you know.
yeah, for
Okay,
sure.
you know, hey, I I feel like doing this, and tomorrow I feel like doing that. Um, because I'm operating from this from a different dynamic or a different group, and
Context, different context as well. Yeah.
maybe that conflicts with my personal ethics, and maybe on that day, I say I have to listen to my personal ethics. This group is, and affecting me too strongly, and or maybe, maybe it's the opposite. Maybe I need to put my personal ethics aside because this group is really important to me,
Mm,
or but I think both can exist simultaneously. The question that I was just trying to ask was, you know, and maybe it's a nonsense question, but is just, is there some sort of cosmic perspective that could maybe show us like the far edges of the concept of ethics to sort of
mm.
say, well, maybe this is something that's occurring in the universe, and maybe this is one way to look at it. But then again, I think you could probably even expand it further than that and say, well, what is a universe? And go out forever and
Yeah,
ever and ever
push
and
the
ever,
question one step further.
and it just disappears, and you have
Yeah,
nothing to stand on, and you have no sense at all, and you can't make sense of anything. And
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
I understand that feeling, and yeah, yeah. I think you do have to be you at some point you do have to say, okay, well, I'm living in a body right now, and I'm hungry. I gotta go eat.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is one thing or one impression I kind of had about Daniel Schmachtenberger. He kind of like he thinks in a very holistic way, I would say, which is very interesting and very nice to explore. But at some point, it doesn't become practical. It kind of decouples from practicality, I would say. So when he explains things, I have to just go back to my own consciousness and think about how this thing is going to be practical, what he's saying. So he usually brings the holistic picture into place, and he actually starts talking about how things are connected and all these in his own way, of course. But then when I actually think about his solutions practically, it doesn't make sense to me. So I have to go back to the reductionist type of model in order for me to conceptualize his ideas more concretely. So I think that's
I
one
think
thing he could use when it comes to his thinking that could actually make it more clear, I guess, because sometimes he extrapolates into that specific model, I would say, too much. But I'm not sure if you
uh,
face this problem in trying to understand his ideas.
with Daniel, no, I feel like I understand him quite well. For me, I think what he's trying to do, um, Daniel is like an imaginer guy. He's like a guy that understands the problems really well.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's
but
actually very true.
he has like a dream, and he understands that these kinds of problems exist. And if we could only like he's not saying this is what the dream looks like and this is what you need to do to get to the dream. That's not what he's not telling you what the dream is,
Mm.
but he's saying what's wrong, what are the things we need to address, to be able to.
Oh, okay, okay. That's interesting.
I kind of feel that's kind of what he's the perspective that he's coming from more
Yeah.
so.
He's diagnosing things more than giving solutions. Yeah, that's true actually. As you're saying it, I'm realizing that most of the times he's just explaining the ideas. But I think the reason why I sometimes don't understand it very well is because I try to think, okay, what is he trying to say when it comes to the solution? But I guess your point of view is that, listen, Thamar, he's only diagnosing things. He's just trying to make you understand. He's not trying to give you a concrete solution. So that's one thing you have
Yeah.
to go on your own research and do. Yeah, that
he,
actually makes it make a lot more sense, I would say. Yeah.
he frequently says like the solutions aren't something that a single person can do. It's something
Mm,
that like the entire, like it's like a huge group of people, maybe like a country or like the world will have to.
the collective consciousness. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but he's saying like that these are how the problems need to be addressed. Like because there's this problem that keeps happening, which is um, which is the game theory, is basically like who we need to win, and then there's technological advancement means that you have more power to do more damage. So Genghis Khan, as violent as he was, could not destroy the planet, but with the advent of the nuclear bomb, all of a sudden a single human being had the power to, destroy the earth.
Yeah.
And now, as from the 70s and onward, the technology has just gotten more advanced, and the possibilities for doing more destruction with has just become more distributed.
Hmm.
So now a single person, if they figure out you know, how to construct molecules and DNA and you can create organisms that might destroy the DNA of every single species on the planet with an AI or something. So the the power to do damage increases as technology
Yep.
does as technology increases. So if you don't have a like it's sort of like you don't have like a child around sharp objects. The child needs to grow up to understand how to be around these things.
Yeah.
Similarly, humanity, has access to all these sharp objects, but we don't have the wisdom yet to
Yeah.
understand not to damage the planet or the ecosystem, that we depend upon. So Daniel sees like that this problem is sort of just getting to a point where things become unstable, like
Yeah.
uh, that the technology is increasing so fast, and our wisdom is not increasing.
Keeping
Uh,
up with it. Yeah.
yeah, it's not keeping up.
Yeah,
So,
I think this is an accurate depiction, and it ties back to the idea of incentives, basically, because the incentives are kind of making people optimize for things that do not give them wisdom, I would say. So it's mostly profits, but it's not optimizing for the things that make people more wise towards. And I think if you design the incentives towards making people optimize for wisdom, I guess, with resources and power and consciousness and all these different things humans possess, then that would solve all the issues basically. But I don't think on a meta level, basically, we don't have the wisdom to design those incentives that make people optimize for wisdom, I
well,
think.
yeah. So it's already. I understand you probably have to get going pretty soon. Is that true, or do you have a little bit more time?
I think I have a little bit more time, probably like around
Okay.
10 minutes. Yeah, we could go.
Don't miss your flight,
Yeah, don't worry, don't
T.
worry. No, no. It's good you reminded me, by the way, because I
Yeah.
was, yeah.
Um, yeah, so what he says is like, okay, well, you can go into wisdom. You can say, okay, we're going to break away and we're going to go into wisdom and we're going to try our best, to figure things out.
Yeah,
And what he says is like, okay, but everybody else, when you go into wisdom, everybody else says, well, now it's time to take advantage of them because they're not, like the game theory is that if you try to go into wisdom, other people are going to build the
yeah,
oil,
yeah,
they're
yeah.
gonna
Exactly,
they're gonna
exactly.
build the weapons, and they're gonna
Multipolar
take
trap.
over.
Yeah,
So it's sort of like the whole planet is the struggle is how do we become conscious enough to, I don't know, it's like we have to figure out a way to group together somehow, and understand like we have to address the issue of energy, of
money,
ecosystem collapse.
monetary system. Yeah.
Yeah, figuring out how is the energy used, and
Mm.
how are the resources being just used or destroyed, how efficient is everything, how's the energy being cycled, how much destruction is it doing to ecosystems.
Hmm.
It's like all of this has to be addressed, and
Yeah.
I
My sense is that
otherwise.
a fundamental one would be the monetary system, I think, to kind of alleviate this problem of incentives being optimizing for profits rather than other things that are more profound. So I think
Definitely.
fixing the monetary system would be a step one. I'm not saying it's the full answer. I think a lot of Bitcoin folks kind of think it's a full answer, but I wouldn't say that's 100% predictable. So I would say a step one would be fixing the monetary system, because a lot of the problems we see, such as as we mentioned, the debts, the treasury bonds, and all these different things, and those are the things that lead to the cascade events that eventually make all these different problems, I would say. So I think the monetary system has to be on top of the list to fix the incentive structure of society as a whole.
Well, what do you mean by fix the
Fix,
monetary system?
yeah, I
Like
guess, yeah, I
like
guess
what, gold? Like what if we just start using gold? Is
I
that what you're
think,
talking about?
yeah, probably fix in my conceptualization would be the five monetary characteristics we mentioned, which is scarcity, portability, like optimizing for all these different things: scarcity, portability, and divisibility. And I
So
forgot
let's
the
say
rest.
let's say let's say gold. Let's say
Yeah,
gold.
gold would be a good first pass approximation or first pass use. I think it's a good way to think about it. But I think as we technologically advance, gold could not be the optimal option because
Okay, what about a gold that was digital,
yeah,
Is that what you're
Bitcoin.
saying?
Yeah, maybe,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't
Yeah,
even I don't necessarily think that I have the full answers when it comes to what exactly is the monetary system, but I think fixing it by optimizing for the five main characteristics of a good money would be, I would say, a good first step basically towards fixing it.
yeah. I mean,
But it's still a difficult question to think about.
it's incredibly complex because, gold exists now. Bitcoin exists now, but it's not taking over the world because what really I don't know, it's like you can keep on doing this. What really matters, what really matters, what really matters, what really matters, but
Yeah,
it's like it they're all connected somehow.
exactly. Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah. Exactly.
I don't know that there is a singular answer. It's
For
like
sure. Yes.
it's almost like we have to grow up in wisdom personally.
For
Each
sure.
and every
Yes.
one of us individually needs to like become more wise, more compassionate, more um, conscious, more deliberate, you know? And at the same time, our cultures have to do that. They
Mhm.
have to become wiser, but also they have to become more connected. So they have to understand, and in my society, there's culture wars between, different groups and it's messy, but what needs to happen is there needs to be better communication,
Mhm.
and understanding and listening. And like what happens in a tribe, how does a tribe deal with their problems? They come together, they dance, they're around the fire, they tell stories, that they're listening to each other. If somebody has a problem in a tribe, if they're really angry and upset, it's a problem for the whole tribe. They have to address it. Well, as the civilization got so big, we weren't able to listen anymore. How do we have that at this other newer scale? You can just see in American politics, it's so messy. It doesn't. It's just it needs to evolve. And that's just this country. So not only does that need to happen in us individually, it also needs to happen in us, like between different cultures, but also between different like nations and groups.
Yeah.
They need to evolve, and then all the nations together need to sort of evolve and come together somehow.
Yeah.
Like and evolve as like a planet. So it seems like to me that it's not just about the technology. It's not just about this or that. It's more like I don't know. It's almost like a I don't know. I think these things are part of it, then that they will evolve. But I think primarily like the it starts with us, and
Yeah.
starts with how we how we feel, how we think,
For sure. Yes.
how we grow,
Yeah.
and how we talk to each other, and how we I think that that's where it starts, and these technologies emerge out of us. Eventually we'll create the technologies. We don't know what they are. We don't know what the new Bitcoin is. We don't know what um, the new government is.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah.
But
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
the new technology, the new artificial intelligence, but we need to this evolution needs to take place in us, I believe.
Yeah. I would agree with you 100%. I think the reason why I said the monetary system is the first step is because I think of this, the point you mentioned, the psychology and people communicating and all these different things in energy and fixing money and all these different things as a recursive cycle, basically. So it's one cycle and you have to just change one thing in order to change the whole thing. So what's the
Yeah.
easiest thing to change from those things? Is it the human psychology? Is it the monetary system? Is it the energy system? I think when we think about it clearly, most likely the monetary system is the easiest part to change, I would say, because it's an external factor. It's much easier to change than internal factors. So as soon as we change that, it's going to lead to cascade events on the whole cycle and basically change the whole thing. So
Yeah,
thinking
I,
about
I
it
agree.
as a
I agree. I
cycle,
agree at some levels, for
yeah. And
sure.
even like for me, I don't have the answers towards what is the full cycle, basically. I'm just saying that psychology is one example, as you mentioned, people connecting in eternal states of humans is very important when it comes to revolutions and changing things to the better. But I also think the external factors, such as the monetary system and the energy system, motivates people to change that internal state, I would say, and just have those different things you mentioned, such as dialogue and just respecting one another and all these different things.
Maybe, but that might be a Jevons paradox sort of thing too. Like, is it is it that the efficiency of the system, creates the reduction in, whatever it is, the reduction in destruction,
Oh,
or
okay,
if
interesting. Yeah. That's
yeah,
that's an interesting link. Yeah. So maybe you fix the monetary system, but it doesn't lead to the things you mentioned. Yeah, that's
yeah,
true. Yeah,
yeah,
of
it
course.
might
Yeah.
have to start from within.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing. But I think it's easier to change people from first, like, I think people need a trigger to change internally in some way. Some people have it individually, but collectively, in order to change, I guess, the collective consciousness, you would have to have some external factor. But as you said, I think internals, like people changing internally, is also possible. I wouldn't rule it out as a solution, but I think the easier ones to implement would be the things that are external, such as the monetary system, the energy system, and all these sort of things.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
It's a very interesting thing to think about,
there's a
actually.
lot of growth that needs to happen. It's like, Daniel used this one metaphor though. He's like, it's, you sometimes you look at the problem and you think it looks insurmountable. But there are things that will happen that we don't understand from this perspective.
Yeah.
Like the 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 bird inside of the egg is coming up against the side of the shell and it's like, I'm growing, I'm gonna get crushed here. Like I'm running out of space. There's no more food, you know. There's no more food in this egg. I ate all of it. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done for. And then the outside of the egg cracks, and the bird comes out and says, "What the hell is this?" Maybe that's something like what we will experience. We have no idea, the kinds of things that might occur.
Yeah.
We cannot see them from this
Or the
perspective.
possible solutions. Yeah.
It
That's
looks
true.
impossible, but yeah, I think maybe we will be surprised.
Yeah, for sure. So, any final remarks, thoughts? I think I would have to get going in like 3 minutes.
Yeah, no, just
So,
catch your flight. But let's get this going more often. I like these conversations. I
for
think they're
sure.
good.
Yes. Yes.